Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. This talk is on opening acts, how attackers get their big breaks. So essentially, initial vectors of compromise in environments that we see in our incident response engagements at Mandy. So I'm Pena. Before coming to Mandy, I've been at Mandy for about 2.5 years now. Before Mandy, I was on the Marine Corps Red Team, doing offensive stuff against the DoD. And at Mandy, I'm heavily involved in incident response. I still do a lot of pen testing, forensics, things like that. Big investigations on financial crime and also APT-related investigations. I'm a Texas alumni, born and raised pretty much. I moved to DC after college, and I went to grad school in DC, and while I was in DC, I was working on the Marine Corps Red Team, and then I was also in Pena, so I was in DC for about, I guess, 2.5 years, almost 3 years. And then I came to LA like a month ago. So I'm brand new to LA. Really enjoying the weather. It's like awesome here. So I'm excited about that. Still with Peña. We have an LA office, so it's pretty cool. So enjoying that. And this is Mr. Nick Hornick over here.
So
You'd like to hold the mic. You're doing great.
We're doing better? This good? All right, perfect.
Malware.
Don't be shy. Come on. Let's do this.
Am I picking you up from somewhere else? So sort of walk through, about myself. I'm a senior consultant with Mandy. I've been here about 3 years this spring. Sort of like Evan, I started in DC. I spent about 2 years there. I initially wanted to come over just to do incident response. That was why I came to Mandy. I just wanted to do IR. So I came over about 3.5 years ago in DC. Started doing that. The opportunity came up to move out west, to sort of beef out consulting in the West Coast. And I was like, yeah, why would I not want to move to LA? I have no ties to DC. So I came out here, been out here about 1.5 years now. Prior to that, I used to work for a defense contractor, and sort of where I really cut my teeth doing just information security in general. And so I sort of got through a lot of stuff. I was on the corporate IT side of it, so I got to see network segmentation, attack mitigation, the whole gamut of what every day sysadmin sees. And I was like, I want to do IR, so I started doing a lot towards the end. That's contractor, APT came into play. I'm like, hey, Mandy does a lot of stuff, came here. Does IRs and forensics because I English well. And also, I'm an interesting person because last night, as Evan and I were putting this together, I realized I don't have a photo of myself. I don't have a photo of myself doing anything cool.
I just took one of you right now, so you can use it in the next one.
I'll add that, and it can just be side for a while. So I don't have a picture, and I also match my photos, where I know on the diagram, pretty sure it does say Chuck is supposed to be here. Chuck will not be here, obviously. He seems to have forgotten that his child's birthday is very soon, so he cannot make the flight out.
That kind of changes. It changes every year, you know.
Yeah.
It is now.
So the next one. So very quickly, mandatory marketing side. Who is Mandy? We've been around for about 10 years now. We were acquired by FireEye earlier this year. We still do and have done IRs, some of the biggest, some of the ones we never hear about, some of the ones that are in the news every day. We have full-range security consulting, nothing changed since FireEye. We still do our proactive paperwork, vulnerability assessments, pen testing. We also do incident response, compromise assessments to sort of answer the question of either A, we've been compromised, how do we fix this, or B, and let's find out if we are compromised. And the third and final one is to sort of look at your security program, people's policy procedures, look at all that stuff, and sort of figure out sort of how can we make this better. Is this really efficient in what we're doing right now? Are we capable of responding to an incident if something did happen? If you receive that phone call in the middle of the night from some law enforcement that says that we need to talk ASAP. That said, worldwide presence was growing massively with FireEye, so we are legitimate all over the world now. Growing with 2,000 plus employees and offices in at least 40 countries, and that's not counting remote. So sort of the agenda of what we want to talk about is sort of, like I said, the initial attack vector. How are attackers getting into an environment? And some of this you might look at it like, no, this is really that new. And to be honest, the high level of this is not anything mind-blowing. You know, there's phishing, you can see that, and yeah, okay, no big deal. But But there's some cool things to that. You don't always see it coming from random Gmail addresses. You don't always see, there's some very cool things we've seen, so we're going to touch on those today. We're going to kind of go through case studies of each one of these and sort of where we've seen it, or sort of how can we identify it better. And this is not in any sense of something that Andy does. It's more, to be honest, the takeaway that we really want everyone here to take from this is when you go back to your own networks, sort of how can we look at things maybe slightly differently. Sort of, yeah, phishing emails happen, drive-by downloads do happen, but how can we maybe look at our logs? Are we looking at everything the right way? Is what we're looking at today right? Are we getting log sources from everywhere? Sort of, or is our processing in place? I mean, are we email patching? The very common, very simple top 5 that we'll touch on at the end. Just sort of walk through those and figure out, you know, if that's a takeaway from anyone in this room, then perfect, mission accomplished.
Generally, what will happen is like someone will get compromised, they'll lose a ton of money or a ton of intellectual property or something, and then afterwards, in remediation, then they say, oh, we should have done that, or yeah, we should have done that. So this is, again, like Nick was saying, sort of like, this is what we would tell you after you got compromised to try to do it before. We're going to start with phishing. Again, nothing new. Like everyone knows what phishing is. Everyone has heard of phishing like tons of times. But this is actually kind of a unique case study of a phishing campaign that we saw in one of our investigations that was very effective. So, again, most common vectors, some are wide variations, some of them are very direct, some of them are just broad phishing campaigns, just going to like send a ton of emails, try to get someone to click on stuff, or some of them are convincing users to take action, others are hosting a spoof website to try to get people to log in credentials and then they'll harvest those credentials. Or some of them are just client-side exploits or where they'll like do a browser exploit, 0 days, something like that. But again, we're going to talk about a very unique case study, which is, in my opinion, the most interesting. So we had a company, the industry in this particular case was a law firm, but I also had 2 other industries here, pharmaceutical and biotechnology. And because they were leveraging the law firm to gain access to these other 2 industries. So phishing email was sent from the law firm with the following scenario. So essentially, attackers were spoofing or sending phishing emails to a law firm, and they would essentially host a spoofed Outlook Web Access website that looked very similar to a law firm. So let's say their domain's lawfirm.com. It was like lawfirmoa.com, and their domain was available. The attackers purchased that domain. It looked very similar to their domain, and again, the page was the exact same. So then they also had another phishing campaign with an attachment with malicious macro. Again, this is nothing new. So we're getting into some of the cool stuff here in a minute. Okay, so this was the Outlook Web Access site. As you can tell, it looks just like Outlook Web Access, right? Nothing new there. This is the PHP code that was behind it, that we actually acquired from the attacker itself. So as you can notice, it would post the username and the password to another malicious page that would then harvest the credentials, and then it would write into a log. Okay, cool, they got credentials now for someone accessing Outlook. Generally, Outlook Web Access is always tied to Active Directory, so those are generally legitimate domain credentials to their environment. So then they sent another one that looked very much like the Outlook prompt. Like if you have Outlook like on your actual desktop and it prompts you for your credentials, this is what the legitimate one looks like. On the right-hand side, they actually create a form that looked just like it. Within Excel, VBA, Macro Excel, you can actually import a form. You can import a picture. This whole thing was like actually an image. And then this is the VBA code behind it. As you can tell, there's 2 different variables, user and parameter. It would call a function called upload post with passing 2 arguments to it, user and password. Here is pretty much the function for upload post. And essentially it would just take those 2 values and it would send an HTTP post request to a attacker-owned website. And it would just have a parameter called victim equals and then the message variable, which are both of those variables essentially concatenated into one variable. And then it would be posted to that website, which would then harvest more credentials. So now you got to think about this. Right now the attacker has, I don't know, let's say 30 credentials to a particular company, in this case a law firm. So what do they generally do with that? Generally what they're going to do is they're going to try to access any sort of external service portals. Like VPN, maybe they can get access to the network that way, SSL VPNs, Citrix, especially things with single factor authentication. So that's like generally like the MO for most attackers. They have credentials, that's what they're going to get in the environment. Not in this case. So in this case, the attacker was actually going back to OWA, their legitimate OWA. They were logging into Outlook Web Access for the law firm on behalf of those users, and they were looking at email threads to biological or biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies that they know they did deals with, and they would actually take existing attachments and say, they would weaponize them, whether it be PDF or whether it be Excel, and they would weaponize the attachments to make them malicious and actually exploit the user. They would modify it a bit, and they would send it back an email within the actual thread from their account saying, hey, I actually made some changes to this document, like, you know, please take a look at this, whatever. And that like owned a ton of biotechnology companies and a ton of pharmaceutical companies. So kind of just a different spin on phishing. They didn't care about getting access to the law firms at all. They just cared about their clients. So it was pretty interesting, and they were very effective. So we did the investigation on the law firm, and going back to the service portals, we did forensics on a lot of the service portal servers. We didn't find any evidence there, and that's where we went back to OWA. And so we were actually responsible for letting all the victims know that they were compromised. And that was kind of annoying because they were really pissed about that. Most of them didn't do anything off the bat. They're like, oh, whatever, we don't really care, whatever. But then the feds got involved, and then the feds had to go talk to them about it, and then they actually performed an investigation as well. We had a question here? I'm sorry?
How are they going to monetize that?
I have no idea. Some of them we did the investigations on, so like we did that work, and they went from there. Other ones, they have internal IR teams, and maybe they did it themselves. I have no idea. We just did our due diligence and our duty, you know, to let them know they were competent. So, kind of give you the overview. Again, here's a law firm. They got access to OWA. So again, they compromised the law firm. In this case, again, OWA. They sent a bunch of phishing emails to a lot of different biotechnology companies. Again, they would just reply back to an existing thread, just saying, hey, like, here's this cool attachment again, I made some modifications, you know, take a look. And then they would compromise, they would open the attachment, they would get compromised. The attacker now has access to the victim's organization. This goes back to that, making an HTTP request to the site, logging that to the C2 server. Again, they would execute a backdoor on most of the systems, and they would get access to those companies. That's just kind of like the overview. So where did the attacker mess up? I was going to say that word. So where did they mess up? So the attacker was trying not to get caught. So they created rules in some of the Outlook Web Access accounts where they would say anything with a string of virus, malware, phishing, or anything like that, I want you to automatically like go to the trash. So like, they would create an Outlook rule on that. So if they got tipped off and they sent out an email to all their users saying, hey, if you guys got this phishing email, don't open it. I don't want you to do anything about it. Like, you know, it would automatically go to the trash can so they wouldn't get tipped off. So it's kind of stupid because we actually found this role. And the way we found it was actually kind of unique is that it was by accident, like in most cases, I guess. And that someone knew they were going to get an email on like a hacking article, and in the subject line it contained like hacked or phished or something like that, and they didn't get the article, and then the guy kept sending it to the recipient, and she's like getting all pissed off because she's not getting this damn article. She's like, what the heck's going on? So she calls IT, IT comes to her computer, and they start looking at her computer, and they're like, well, have you looked at your junk mail? She's like, yeah, I look at my junk mail all the time, it's not there. And they look at her trash can, and they see like 10 emails from this like hacking thing. They're like, well, why did you go to the trash can? And that's when they identified this rule, which she did not implement, nor did IT. And that's what pretty much led up the investigation and how we identified the attacker. So now we identified some evidence, and we identified when phishing emails came on. So like now what do you do? Like how do you do this at scale? How are you going to identify all the users that actually got the email, the phishing email, and how do you identify all the victim organizations that got the email so we can go and form the victim organizations that they actually got compromised? That's where exchange logs come in. So if you start at the bottom, first thing you notice is you have good timestamp. That's very important in any incident response engagement. Second thing is you have where the email came from. In this case, attacker at othervictim.com. What's important about this is that you have a network-based indicator. You know that othervictim.com is like one domain that got compromised. In this case, this is the law firm. So you know like this email came from the law firm. And then you have a victim user at victim.com. So, and that came from the law firm itself, webmail.victim.com. So like, you know, it came from a legitimate mail server, again, the law firm, but that's because the law firm got compromised, and I said their OA got compromised, so it was sending it from there. And then they were sending it to, again, like victim users and other organizations. And most importantly, you have the attachment. So now we have an actual file that we can look for in the environment. And the way Peña does things is we have this appliance called Mirror. And Mirror is what allows us to perform IR at scale. So we put this appliance in every organization that hires us to do an IR. And we install agents all across the environment. Sometimes it's 150,000 plus endpoints. And what we can do is we can sweep the environment for specific indicators of compromise. In this case, we can create a very specific indicator of compromise for that particular file name. That can include an MD5, it can include a file size variant, it can include a file name. We can be as specific as we want to, so we can scale the environment pretty well. And again, we also have timestamps, so that's very important. So without exchange logs, we actually wouldn't have been able to answer any questions. We wouldn't have been able to answer how many people got the phishing email. We wouldn't have been able to see how many victim organizations received the phishing email from the attacker. So just by having logs, like, answered a ton of questions, and we were able to help out a lot of victim organizations that got compromised because of this phishing campaign. So this is something from Entrance that we release. It's like a report that we release every year that Intel does. 44% of all observed phishing emails were IT related, often attempting to impersonate a targeted company's IT department. And most of them are sent on Wednesday. So if any of you guys are pen testers and you're wondering like, hey, when's the best time to send a phishing email? The attackers already did the homework for you. Wednesday seems to be a good time. You know, most people, I guess, are working there that day. So also IT related, just to kind of give you like a tidbit, most IT related phishing emails are like this. Hey, we need to make sure that your browser plugins are in compliance. I want you to run this browser plugin check. It's like a URL to an executable. That's a browser plugin check, right? And then they say if you don't run this browser plugin check within the next 5 days, IT is going to disable your account. And like naturally, most users are like, hell no, I don't want to disable my account. So like most of them, it's pretty effective. Like that's probably the most common type of phishing email that we see. Again, IT related. Syrian Electronic Army. This is just some tidbits again from M-Trends. They successfully infiltrated more than 40 organizations, primarily targeting the websites and social media accounts. Most of them were Western news agencies. Can anyone guess why the Syrian Electronic Army may have wanted to go after news agencies? Mainly for PR, right? They want to like talk of this guy Bashar al-Assad or whatever. I wanted to say something else that's not on here though, as far as Western news agencies. There's a lot of Russian attackers that compromise news agencies, especially like people that are going to post things that haven't yet been posted, right? So every single news company, they have an editor, and the editor gets caught winds of like an article before they go out. Where that's really important is when companies are about to buy another company, when they're doing business with companies, or they're about to like release a new technology. And why that's important is because you can actually perform insider trading on any of these companies on the stock market if you actually know the information ahead of time. So that's a big reason why we see Russian attackers actually compromise news agencies as well. So it's not uncommon that they'll catch wind of these articles before they get released while the market is still open and just like buy and sell stock like crazy, making millions of dollars. Okay, so on the detection, protection, and response side, obviously filtering technologies can be very useful. Things like IronPort, it's pretty good. Hosting is pretty good. FireEye EX appliance is awesome. For those of you who don't know, I'm not trying to like sell, but it's really like a legit technology. Like if you guys don't know what it does, is every single binary that goes into, every single attachment that goes into your Exchange server, into your environment, it will get sent to a sandbox and it will perform basic triage on the binary itself to determine if it's malicious or not. That's different than like an AB signature. An AB signature is like, okay, does it match this criteria? Yeah, it's bad. No, like this will actually perform analysis. On the example I gave you before with the Excel spread, with the macro-enabled Excel spreadsheet, that sends an HTTP post request like out with the parameter with data in it harvested from the environment. Like that's like a known bad thing. Like, but AB is not going to catch that. Hosting is not going to catch that. AppRiver won't catch that because it's not like a known signature. It's a unique macro. But FireEye EX will because it's doing dynamic analysis on the binary or on the attachment itself. It's kind of a unique technology. It's pretty cool. Obviously, everyone knows, number one thing, user awareness, user education, reporting messages that are important. If the user knows, they can report it. That's always number one when it comes to phishing, nothing new there. Ability to find and delete messages from user inboxes and mailbox is helpful once the message has been detected. That goes back to that exchange log I was telling you about. Critical. Like I said, we were able to identify every inbox that got compromised, every victim organization that got sent to, mainly just because they had mailbox. So if you get a phishing email within 24 hours, you can identify all those and the questions that I just gave you, like every user or victim organization, things like that, then you know you're doing well. Most people don't actually log exchange logs, or they don't send it to a SIM. For those of you who don't know what a SIM is, like things like Splunk or ArcSight, where that aggregates a bunch of logs, whether they're AV logs, exchange logs, CNS logs, you can perform a query really quickly on this day. Any sort of criteria you want, you can make it like this attachment or this user or whatever you want, and you can aggregate all that data for you with a SIM. You have a question?
What were those filtering programs? One was Iron Port.
Iron Port, Postini. Postini is like a mail spam filter. It's an external. It's like a third party. It's AppRiver, and then there's FireEye EX Appliance, which is really expensive and meant for mainly big organizations. They put a price tag on that for sure. Okay. So known vulnerabilities. Nick, I think you're going to talk to this in a minute. So known vulnerabilities, things like web server, web application servers. So think of this like, again, I just want to like step back for a minute. These are initial vectors into an environment. So everything that we're going to talk to going forward are how from externally, anyone from the internet can access organizations. So web servers are really big because most web servers are hosted in a DMZ. Most people do not segregate the DMZ well enough, so that's a big vector. HeartBleed was really huge this year. We have a good case study that Nick's going to talk to you on that. And then some other tools that are pretty popular like exploit kits and custom exploits, 0 days and things like that. So a drive-by download. For those of you who don't know what a drive-by download is, this could be a lot of different things. It could be like a Java drive-by download where you host a malicious site and someone goes to that site and asks you to run this Java applet. That Java applet executes malicious code and you have a backdoor in your system. Sometimes it could be an exploit kit, and it's typically difficult to attack specific target organizations. But in some cases, you can do this at a mass scale. And in this case, in February 2013, NBC's website was actually compromised with a drive-by attack. Essentially, it was hosting an iframe here that would redirect to this malicious website that's hosting google.php. And as you can see, most all malicious iframes are going to have like a width of 1 or height of 1, so you can't actually see it on the page. And for those of you who don't know what an iframe is essentially a special HTML tag that actually executes or renders another page within that page. So in this case, this was hosting an exploit kit called RedKit. And so if anyone visited that NBC's web page, they wouldn't actually see the iframe, but that would actually execute on the user system from the application there in the browser, and then it would execute a backdoor on the system, and they would get access to their system. So what's unique is that you saw this in the JavaScript files. Document.writeLine is essentially a standard JavaScript function that writes a string to this, or to the actual file. In this case, it was this. Notice that the domains are different. There were about 4 or 5 different domains in this case, which means that the attacker was actively changing these domains as they were getting caught. And you notice in the JavaScript file that the document, like there was actually source to write this to this. So what that means is somewhere on the web server itself, the attacker was somehow modifying code, which could mean 2 things. It could mean the attacker compromised the web server, or it could mean that someone else is modifying the data and not knowing that they're doing it wrong. So how would that work on NBC's side? Generally through an advertising company. So what happened was the attacker actually bought legitimate advertising through the advertising company, and they would put malicious code in their advertisement. And the stupid advertising company didn't do their due diligence or their like QA on the code, and they just like published it on NBC's site on tons of pages, and that gets a lot of traffic. So you can imagine how many people got compromised by this exploit kit. So The advertising company got reprimanded pretty bad for that, for not actually doing code review on their advertising code. But that's how a lot of people got compromised back in February because of that one specific iframe posting an exploit kit. So next, I'm going to talk about a cool HeartBleed case study that we did this year.
So HeartBleed, I'm assuming everyone in here knows what HeartBleed was because it was going to be the end of the internet. It's at the very short, for anyone who doesn't know, there's a vulnerability within TLS that basically the heartbeat between the client and the server said, hey, send me back a small amount of bytes and just make sure that you're still there. You could actually trick the server and say, hey, like send me back 64K, and it would just send it right back. So what did it give you? It gave you an arbitrary chunk of memory of 64 kilobytes. So it didn't really give you anything that was like, this is exactly what I want, I got this now. It gave you just a chunk of memory. So you just had to run that multiple times, and that was your payoff. You just had to repeatedly execute and exploit the HeartBleed vulnerability. And so as soon as that came out, then everyone on the internet, as soon as exploit code was out there, everyone was running against anything and everything because they didn't believe it, or I don't know, I don't really know why, but it took off like wildfire. So I'm going to probably talk way ahead of myself on this one because this is one of those animation slides that I hate. But so I'm going to sort of describe the environment first for where and sort of why HeartBleed would actually matter in this environment. So the victim organization has been compromised for a year. Starting on day one, 365 days later, the attacker had access to the environment. They came in, they did very typical attacker life cycle. Came in, dropped a backdoor, escalated privileges, moved laterally, dropped more backdoors, learned more about the environment. The sysadmins knew where data was at, and then laid quiet until they had to actually steal data. Very traditional, very typical, but we're using backdoors. So fast forward a year, the victim identifies this activity. Oh no, we're compromised. Called us. We came in, we performed IR. It took around, for the sake of argument, it took 4 weeks to go from IR to as well as remediation planning, figure out what do we need to do and how do we need to throw the attacker out of the environment. So in those 4 weeks, we asked them to do a bunch of different things. One was, enable two-factor authentication on your VPN, which was not there. So they went ahead and did that in those 4 weeks. Implement application whitelisting on servers. What about workstations? Well, workstations, no way. Anyone who's sysadmin, you're going to say, yeah, okay, I'm going to find every binary in my environment on workstations. Not going to happen. So they did it on servers, though. They also went through and we asked them the most difficult question in the world. Can you reset all passwords in your environment? Yeah, it was a silence. It was like, come on, seriously, it's really what you want to do? And it was, but we had to make exceptions to it. So they said we could get 95%. In 4 weeks, we just simply don't have enough time to actually go through and get all of our service accounts. Obviously, the core accounts that you really want to make sure to reset as far as an investigative mindset, but they just simply couldn't. There wasn't enough time. Applications would break. The business would scream and shout. They just couldn't simply do it. So what we did instead was we made sure all alerting for like event logs, firewall logins, VPN logins, for those service accounts especially, anytime they were even tried, we made sure they were pushed to the SIN and we made sure we alerted them. Because we knew where they should have been used, we just didn't have the time to actually go through and make sure we updated passwords. The kind of great accounts that have a password set up day one, they never expire, those kind of accounts. So we went through and we asked them to do that. So we had 95% password reset, enabled two-factor, did whitelisting, did a lot of great stuff in 4 weeks. And I think we can move on. If not, I'll...
And they kicked the attacker out of the environment.
So 4 weeks later, performed remediation, and the attacker goes away. They're removed, rebuild all compromised systems, passwords are reset, the attacker is gone. So, day after remediation, the attacker just starts spamming their VPN device or the HeartBleed vulnerability. So what did the attacker do? They hijacked multiple active user sessions, and we'll talk about sort of how we ended up finding that along the way. They used HeartBleed, and again, the way they did it with active session tokens, and there was a lot of talk afterwards of any major vendor that uses the SSL libraries. Pretty much within a week, I want to say, off the top of my head, most every major vendor, the Cisco's, the Junipers, etc., had issued a patch for their devices saying, hey, we're using this library, we didn't know, and so they issued a patch. the key piece, I think, really to this slide is knowing what was in the environment was this piece of it here, the multi-factor authentication. Two-factor is the best way ever. If I get off AD, get off single factor, go to two-factor. Not in the case with HeartBleed, and that to me is why HeartBleed actually deserves some of the credit that it got, was because in this particular case, it totally thwarted the two-factor idea, the whole premise behind it. It doesn't matter. As long as you already have an active session token, you're able to pull that from memory, and it's a valid session. Two-factor, gone, sorry, authenticated, that doesn't care. Any sort of host-based check, host-based certificates, doesn't matter, are validated on initial login. So none of that really mattered. So how do we actually catch this piece? And the two main pieces are IDS signatures and the VPN logs. Looking at them after the fact is really what sort of nailed down what happened there on day 31, the day post remediation. And sort of how we did that was, one, they had an IDS already in place. They were looking at ingress traffic, filtering for, or searching just for any sort of hardware. So there was a handful. The emerging threats guide we had Thursday. We also had our own custom written. So we were watching for it. And what we found was that over 17,000 times this IDS signature fired off. And so then how do we see this? Oh my God, like 17,000, it's a crazy amount. What did we do? So the biggest one was that the IP address, the attacker simply didn't change infrastructure. They sort of maintained the same subnets that they were previously using. So it's sort of easy to pick out. Like, yeah, they're probably upset, this lost access. They're still coming from the same destination. The biggest one, and this is probably the one that caused the most trouble to sort of bring this to our attention very quickly, was sort of the IPs and the session switching between valid user session to the attacker session. There's intermittent connectivity, and all of a sudden you have a user base that is kicking and screaming, what are you doing, IT? And so it was sort of this, like, what is happening? Why is my VPN client telling me that it's reconnecting, and why am I reconnecting? So we saw that in the logs. And so in the logs, we also see this IP address, the legit user, we see the authentication scheme, then we see the attacker IP, all of a sudden using that same session, then it switches back to the original IP. And we just see this back and forth, back and forth. And what we kept seeing there was with the timestamps, they were always very quickly. It was almost always a cyclic. It was one then the other. It just happened over and over again, which explains number two even more. And last one was when we looked at it, it was just purely, hey, we're a US-based company. Why, and none of our employees really travel, and the few people that do typically have management approval. Why do we have IP addresses from Denmark logging in? Why is Germany logging in? Why do we have from Saudi Arabia? Why do we have any of these strange geo-IP lookups? Why are any of these IP addresses connecting? Which these really weird IP addresses now causing impact, and we can prove this.
They thought that teleportation was insistent of that. Like, one user coming from over here, then Denmark, like within seconds.
It does exist. And so by looking at through that, again, we could look at the VPN logs and log those, or look at those events and log them and look at them in order to see IDS alert, keep going, VPN flip-flop for a bit, and then the attacker could tell that there was an active session there, and they were getting disconnected or reconnected repeatedly using that same session token. They would switch back HeartBleed for another 1,000, get another session, try that one. So they were actively trying to grab those session tokens.
So that's just a cause of
Because the session could only be used for one valid connection. So you were seeing if I was already using that one, and all of a sudden somebody is impersonating me, it's creating that session. So it's only too late. Yeah, in this case, it was so quick. It was always trying to constantly. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we saw, the connections so consistent. Yeah, so you had to see a lot in order for them to get the data that they wanted, but you also had to, in order to get the right data that you want, because ideally what you want to get is some user that wants to bed for the night, say on VPN, there's no valid connection there, you can just grab that ID, you don't have to worry about them sort of battling things over. So what was the end game here? Obviously intermittent connectivity, users were upset, at least some users were upset. but it was also, it goes back to the initial user awareness of being able to pick up that phone call and, hey, IT, something's wrong, I don't know why, but I double click something or I can't get connected, this is strange. What we also saw, and the whole reason why there's a whole backstory to this, is because eventually the attacker found a session that was indeed someone sleeping at night, they grabbed a valid session, let's move on from there. So the attacker, like I said, they knew the environment well, they had lived there for a year. They immediately went from the VPN to hop to the one server farm. They tried a few times with accounts that had the password changed. WTF, I want access. So what they kept doing is just trying different passwords. And eventually they used one of the service accounts that actually had access to it. Immediately when they logged in, the alert was fired on the SIM, stock was aware, and then immediately after that, the attacker got tired of playing this game on VPN and trying to get valid sessions. So they just went ahead and they were just going to drop a backdoor right there and figure out what's going on. Well, unfortunately, the application went to Steam, alerted that, alerted it, and threw up the big red flag. It was something that's really, really wrong here. Along the way, sort of along the way, the biggest takeaway from this was, and I think the first one is, again, maybe nothing groundbreakingly new, but it's something that needs to be kept aware. Don't treat software any different than you would hardware and networking device updates. If something is vulnerable to it, it doesn't reduce the impact because it's a networking device, or because it's really hard to do, or because there's no patching mechanism for it. It's probably the biggest takeaway from this is that even if people are maybe against it, there's going to be business impact if we do this. It's one of those things that needs to be done because it's one of the pieces that was sort of moved away from when we were going through the remediation of that. The IDS signature obviously was instrumental, and seeing it so many times, looking back on it, we should have created an alert in the SIM that said, if you see any alert more than X amount of times in X amount of seconds, we should have fired a more critical alert. Looking back on it and sort of lessons learned, we could have used that and leveraged the IDS and the SIM much better. And lastly, sort of GeoIP. I'm not a huge fan of attribution via IP, but when things like that are strange, where IPs are based out of certain geographic locations and they're not supposed to be there, it's odd. It's something that we still do.
All right. So the next thing I want to talk about are custom application vulnerabilities specific to externally facing custom applications. So in this case, again, known vulnerabilities on internet-facing systems are harder to find these days than before. A lot more software developers are starting to implement security in their security development lifecycle. So it's a lot more difficult to find common OAuth top 10 type vulnerabilities on major external sites that could get an attacker access to the internal network, but it's still out there. Some attackers have moved to custom application logic. So SQL injection is still the most common vulnerability exploited to actually gain access to an internal environment. And we have a case study for that. So in this case, the victim was in the financial services industry. And the attacker identified an internet-facing vulnerability within an ASP.NET application. So these are pretty much just URL encoding translations for you guys so you can kind of understand what some of these logs mean. So, and the first log you'll notice is a parameter, there's a GET request to news.aspx, and there's a parameter called ID not equals, and in this case it's 33, which is a normal page. If they've done a GET request on news.aspx and with the question mark ID not equals 33, it would have rendered a page. In this particular case, you can see the attacker put a %27 in there, which is a URL encoded tick, which in any SQL, for those of you who understand the backend SQL query behind it, it's going to have select, let's say, some table star from news where ID not equals 33, it's going to come back with a query. But if it's ID equals 33 tick, it's a syntax error. So in this case, it rendered back a syntax error on the page. So the attacker knew, oh, that's vulnerable because I know it's running the backend SQL server. So then he comes back and he's like, okay, let me do my standard 1 equals 1 type of SQL injection attack to see if I get all the columns within that particular table, which he got. So then he moves on. So then he's like, okay, so let me try union select to run an entirely new query to pull back a server name. For those of you who don't know what a union select is for SQL injection, essentially what that is there's going to be a normal query ran, and a union all select will, essentially union all will concatenate two queries into one, so you can run your own arbitrary query after the initial query that's already set to be done within the backend web server. So then he does that. It comes back with a 200, which means an HTTP response that's 200 is a successful response. So he knew it was working. He probably got the data back on the page. So then he comes back and runs xbcmd shell. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's built into all SQL servers by default. On SQL Server 2005 and below, it was enabled by default. Everything above that version is disabled now, but you can re-enable it with a query. So it's as long as you have permissions to do so. And what that does is it allows you to run actual Windows commands on the backend system. In this case, he pinged google.com. And the attacker was actually kind of stupid in this case because he pings google.com, but he's not going to get anything back. So like, if I was the attacker, I would have pinged google.com, I would have piped it out to a file called like test.txt, and then I would have done a get request for text.txt to see what the results were. And essentially what he was trying to do is determine if this particular web server could connect outbound on port 80. And the reason why he's probably doing this is because he wants to put a backdoor on there to connect out via that port. So eventually what he does is he tests if he can write a file to the server. And he was successful. So again, he runs a command that echoes out this URL encoded string, which translates to this. And it's an eval request for some random characters. And it's a pretty small request, right? Like it's just a few characters long. And then he pipes that out to a file within the web root and calls it shell.txt. And for those of you who have followed the China Chopper web shell, that's pretty much what this is. So you have an eval statement, an eval request. You can have a China Chopper, a client that can connect to that, and you have full like interface to the web server. And it's all via the web. So he would then just have to go to shell.txt with his China Chopper client, and then he can interface with the backend web server, run commands, upload files, things like that. It's pretty effective. For those of you who haven't looked up China Chopper, I would suggest you do some research on it because it's a really cool web shell that's very effective. Again, you only need a few characters of a string for an ASP.NET file. It also supports PHP and a few other languages, so it's something to look into if you haven't already. Attackers use it all the time, so do pen testers. So definitely something to look into if you haven't heard of it. So what are some recommendations on this? Obviously, this web server is vulnerable to SQL injection. So again, going back to the software development lifecycle, if developers know to implement security in the software development lifecycle, concatenation queries like wouldn't have happened. Like a user for the web server that's actually manipulating a parameter to modify the backend query server would have never happened if they had done like a store procedure, predefined queries that are on the backend server. Like none of that would have happened if the actual developers were not or were coding securely. So going back to that, most developers are on a deadline, so they don't really care about security. They more care about like getting it done when they need to get it done. So that's like always been the case for developers. So again, the software development lifecycle, if they put more time, as far as like, here's time to your deadline to add security to your logic, that would be good. Implement integrity checking on the web root directories that contain static content. If you know you have static content on a web root directory that's never really going to change that often, maybe once a year, you can implement integrity checking like Bit9 is a good one, Tripwire is a good product for that. Tripwire is free, it's been around for a long time. And essentially what it does is it MD5s all the files within the entire web root directory. If there's any sort of discrepancy between the MD5 from yesterday to today, it will alert and it'll say, hey, there's a modification in this web root directory. Did any of you guys make that change? No, it's likely something that you need to look into. That's not practical for dynamic content. If you have dynamic content changing all the time, obviously you're going to get a shit ton of false positives. You don't want that, so again, I specified it to static content there. Ensure your internet-facing applications are maintained, patched, things like that. And penetration tests are critical, for critical applications are also really good because you will identify these type of vulnerabilities if you can hire someone to exploit them for you. And one last thing that's not on here is, again, something I did want to mention is like impact. Assume your web server got compromised. What can an attacker do with that compromise? Again, going back to segmentation from a corporate network to your DMZ. what are the ACLs between the firewalls and your DMZ and your corporate network? Is it easily accessible to move laterally if you're an attacker from there? Like, that's huge. Like, that's always the case for our investigations. Like, an attacker compromises the web server on DMZ. Like, okay, then he got access to the corporate network, stole financial data, whatever the case may be. Like, that shouldn't happen. That should be completely segmented between the DMZ or the corporate network. Furthermore, you could also third-party host your server, your web server, so that there's no ties between the corporate network and the web server at all. Just something to note there. Legitimate web access. Okay. So some guys, some companies actually will compromise another company to gain access to a company, very similar to the law firm. And in the case of Target, that's like the biggest one out right now. An attacker actually compromised a vendor network that had VPN access into the Target network. And what was really bad on Target's side is that they didn't segment the vendor network VLANs from the actual user VLANs. So whenever a vendor would VPN into the network, they had the same visibility into the network as a normal user would if they VPN into the network. So that was a big no-no on their end. So again, that's one way of, like, you have legitimate access and that you have legit creds. So you log into the VPN at Target. Like, it's hard to decipher between a known good and a known bad. Like, that's tough because they're coming in with legit creds. You're not seeing a ton of failures there. You're seeing a legitimate credential login. And other ones are like password dumps, pastebin. You see all the time leaks of information, leaks of usernames and passwords. Things like that can be leveraged to gain access to networks as well. One really big one that I'm sure all of you guys have heard of is the Adobe leak. So there were like 152 million accounts leaked. So for those of you who followed that, what was leaked was an email address, a triple des encrypted password, and a password hint. So for those of you like computer science majors here, you could probably think right now, like, what could I do with that information? And attackers would write scripts that would target domains or email addresses. So in this case, let's go back to Target for a minute. And let's say I want to target all users from Target.com. So I wrote a script to, like, would harvest all the email addresses for Target.com. Let's just say there's 100 of them. So for all those 100 email addresses, there's a triple des encrypted password that's unique. And let's say there's a triple des encrypted password and there's like 500 other triple des encrypted passwords of the same string, all of which contain password hints. At that point, you have 500 password hints to one triple des encrypted string. So it's very likely you could probably guess the password with 500 password hints, especially if the password hints are pretty stupid, like my favorite football team, and then another password hint being like, I really love Cowboys, or something like that. So that's a really easy way to get a lot of passwords for a particular domain. Or you can target a specific email address. So let's say it's Nick Hornick at Target.com. So now Nick Hornick, and now I have a password for Nick Hornick at Target.com. I'm going to try to log into their external presence. For those of you who followed the Target breach, the attacker actually got access to the Citrix server after they VPN'd in using the vendor VPN, again with legitimate credentials, and then they were able to RDP around with laterally, get backdoor, things like that. But again, using legit credentials. So things like this are pretty important to note. If you have a company, we'll go back into the recommendation slides, but if you have a company, a large enterprise, and you follow, like, there's some that actually have a dedicated team to follow these kind of leaks to see what email addresses were leaked, and they change their accounts pretty frequently. So there's something to note there. I already talked about the Citrix portal. Users reusing accounts from personal emails so that they sign up with Adobe. So that's like if I knew Nick Hornick had a Target.com email address, but he also had a Yahoo.com email address, and he reused that password. Again, you can use some of these leaks to gain access to their environments if they reuse passwords from personal to actual their business account. So again, consider who you're providing access to and what. So like again with the Adobe, there were personal email accounts and a lot of company email accounts. I would have never signed up for like a service with my company account unless it was directly tied to like company billing. Normally I have like a BS email that I do random stuff on. So I always try to separate those two. Implementing two-factor authentication is really important. Most external compromises that with legit credentials, they log in using single factor. That's how they were able to do it. If there was a second factor involved, obviously they probably wouldn't have been able to leverage those credentials. And then monitor public password dumps. Like I said before, some companies, especially large organizations, have a team dedicated to just track these leaks and see like what email addresses were leaked and know go change the passwords to those particular accounts.
And so just to sort of wrap up, because I know we're getting close to done at the end, and I don't know if there's one after this or if it's lunch. But so there's a handful of other ways as well to get access that are unique. We don't see that much. And the first one is mass malware, and I will touch on this in just a moment. The other three, phone-based social engineering, malicious insider, physical access, not seeing much. But for example, phone-based social engineering, I'm sure everyone at least knows of, or maybe you had it happen yourself. When Dell support calls you up and needs you to go to some URL and download some executable and run it into compromise. So like, little things like that, it does happen. It's not impossible. It's a real thing. But do we see it very targeted? No, not so much. And in fact, personally, I've never seen that myself. Malicious insider, data leakage is obviously a problem. So to make sure everyone's aware of that. But at the same time, there's always that threat that someone's going to go out there, has access to a bunch of information, a bunch of PI, or just a bunch of R&D data, a bunch of sensitive data that you might have, and just take it and run it. And last but not least, physical access. Sure, if you give anyone the keys to your house and you tell them just don't come in here, someone probably will. So it's just sort of one of those thoughts about just physical access is paramount just alongside cyber. But hop forward to the next slide and sort of touch on mass malware because this was unique. And again, I'll talk through it quickly. But essentially, what had happened was a system was compromised within a retail organization. There you go. It was compromised within a retail organization. This regular workstation compromised a bank intrusion. This is Citadel, Zero Access, one of those. We're looking for plain text credits being posted via web browser. Run of the mill, what we even call commodity malware, mass malware. It's not targeting an organization, but it is targeting the user who wants to record data, who wants to see data about it. And what had happened was, so from the botnet, from the hacker side, they had seen that, we've seen this IP address that's hosting, and it looks like it's coming from this retail organization. What this could be, is this really where I think this is coming from? And so they connected through it, and any of those backdoors, any of that malicious software has backdoor functionality, at least to a point. It can give maybe some sort of shell level access, roll it around, sure enough, that's where it's coming from. What had happened here was botnet operator just went out on the market and said, hey, I have access with system level permissions on a host in this environment right now. Here's the price tag, someone buy it off me. Sure enough, cyber criminal, that's what they do, right? So they went out and they bought it off. A couple days later, what we seen was we started to see anyone with zero access, Zeus, Citadel, is very dynamic DNS, very fast flux, it changes, it looks crazy, it makes zero sense, it's just random characters, random string that, come on, you're not going to be able to say that. But what we've seen was that it slowly started to change. It went from being this random crazy string to, malicious.actor.com, to just being very focused to like financial group that we definitely do track. And then from there, what we saw was the file system showed that files started being created, new backdoors started being created, different sort of text output of like different reconnaissance scripts being run. We see that being created on the system. We see a new backdoor being created. Obviously, it executes. We see forensic evidence of that. And then we see the original, bank intrusion, Zeus, Zero Access. That goes away. They don't really need that anymore. I just bought my way in, and now I'm hanging out here in a retail organization close to the HQ. So it's a sort of a unique way of, a lot of times, and we're guilty of this as well, we say, it has to be focused, to a targeted attacker, but it's just one of those in-game results of being diligent and making sure that, yes, it's commodity malware, it's mass malware, but there's no reason for it to be hanging out in your environment. It can be cleaned up, it can be remedied quickly, easily, hopefully, and then go on about your day. So key takeaways, we're just going to tire through these. We talked more in depth about these throughout the presentation itself, but just this is sort of our top 5 sort of rundown of what can we take away from it. the TLDR side is right there, and they're telling me you're flashing the red light right now that we need to wrap up. So I was real quick. User awareness training, just having that open connection between users, staff, and IT, and just being able to say, hey, I have a problem, I click something, what do I do? Defense in depth, sort of looking at it, not in the traditional method of like layers of security, but more looking at it in the sense of, do we have reduction in admin rates around, or does every user have it? Sort of limiting the impact of when they attack this access to your environment, are they going to be able to run wild immediately, or can you at least give yourself enough time to detect this activity and then respond to it accordingly? As well as restricting egress traffic. One that I don't see happen a lot, and I don't quite understand why, is, for example, DNS workstations will be querying quad 8s because they want to query Google's DNS server without using internal DNS. Without doing that, you're aligned to your workstation's DNS queries. So little things like that, DNS, it should all be going through proxies. Your internal architecture of DNS should be querying upwards. There's no real reason for, especially a workstation, to ever be accessing the internet without hopping through something you can look at later, hopping to log efficiently, being able to look at those logs, query those logs, figure out what exactly happened, when did it happen, and count this within, does a query take me years to run because it's not really correlated well, or does it take, can we come back in 10 minutes? Obviously patching, SDLC, we were talking about not that long ago. Like hop on more. Last but not least, we sort of talked about that managed hiring, talked to one of us after, talked to anyone, folks at FireEye. And last but not least, even though we're quite after questions, I don't know if the mic's going to be shut off on us, but we'll be milling around here for just a little bit. If you want to grab us. Sorry for the speed shutdown.